Hello and welcome to part 3 of my deconstruction of my discussion with Stefan Molyneux on his show, where we talked about metaphysics and where I attempted to point out a particular nasty, what I call a paradox in his presumed metaphysics, or the metaphysics I presume that he supports. So it's like I was starting by, saying, well, let's talk about metaphysics, and he agreed to do that. And I was sort of trying to let him talk about it or present it, and then I would point out the contradiction, right? He supports what would be called the materialist approach to metaphysics, which is vastly inferior to idealism, in my opinion. Idealism might not be perfect, but at least it's superior to materialism, which has all sorts of things about it that sort of people can't explain who support it, right? And they might even be ignorant of these problems, not least this paradox, right? And other things I pointed out, like the hard problem consciousness. But, as usual with Stefan Molyneux, as if you have been following Molyneux for some years at least, you will know that he's sort of, whenever there's somebody he doesn't like who's actually able to argue philosophically, and particularly with things like morality, metaphysics, right? These two are sort of, when you start to talk about that, it's like throwing a red towel towards a bull, right? So he can't really argue very well, even though he has attempted to write a book called The Art of the Argument, as if he's some kind of master of the argument. The art of the argument is even an art. It's not just something you do, right? But when you listen through his approach to when he invites me to come in, it's not exactly an invite, but at least when I was in that chat by chance, he sort of mentioned my name and said, as if I wanted to come on, well, okay, then let's talk some metaphysics, right? Where was I going? You see how ridiculously bad he is at arguing, and it's not that I think if he didn't have this need to be superior and push people away who doesn't conform to whatever, right? Then he can't sort of entertain other ideas that goes against his mantras. Then there's something that seems to click inside him, and then he becomes sort of very hostile towards you, right? And then he uses all sorts of weird sophist tricks in attempt to label you as some kind of idiot, and then he's going to say, well, I'll kick you out, you are disturbing my philosophical peace, right? So, and that's clearly what he's trying to do, right? And I have deconstructed one of his videos called Nihilist versus Philosopher, which is like 4 or 5 years old, right? In 3 parts I deconstructed, and he's basically doing the same thing with me, right? He's trying to find every kind of trick to kick me off, or make me unbalanced in my approach, or gaslighting, all sorts of weird stuff that has nothing to do with any kind of decent philosophical course. And I mean, it's like I wouldn't, even if you begged me or paid me $1 billion, or maybe I would, right? But just for the money, go back and have a discussion with him, because he's awful. He's not only awful at it. I mean, if somebody is not very good at arguing philosophically, I would try to take the approach of, okay, but listen to me, when you're arguing this way, there might be this problem or that problem, or this weakness or that weakness, but I might be wrong. You might correct me. I'm not trying to lecture you, but being helpful and inquisitive. No, he has nothing of that, right? It's like it's his way or the highway, right? It's like, repeat after me what I said. Repeat my argument, which is somewhere in the last 8 minutes of my monologue, right? That's the sort of patronizing, belittling format he has. And it's awful. It's beyond awful. It's disgusting, right? Who in the right mind would feel good about themselves after having treated a guest like this? I mean, I can't even imagine myself behaving like that towards somebody who freely and by their own accord, having a decent approach to philosophy, can argue, have treated a person like that and then sleep soundly at night. I mean, there's something wrong with you then, right? There is something wrong with him, right? Okay, let's head back into it. I rewound half a minute or so we can sort of you can recapture where we left off last time.
How do I differentiate?
And I can recapture. So let me see if I can get the right sound level here.
What I'm arguing for is external to the mind and what is internal to the mind.
Yeah, but then if you're saying everything from the ground is within your mind, then we agree. We're on the same page from the starting point. But then there's nothing in that. Then you can't say about that experience, which you only from the starting ground have inside your mind, that you need to start to point out what part of it is something that is outside the mind, or a representation, or something outside. Why would you need to get to that philosophy? It's like what is it about it that makes you convinced that you need to differentiate what part of it is inside and what part of it is something that is representation of an outside?
Oh, so because I don't want to be insane. Yeah, because I hang on. You asked me a question. Sorry, you asked me a question. I thought, was that a rhetorical question, or if you want to keep going, that's fine. I thought you were asking me a question.
Though. No, that's not. That's a metaphysical part, or the part of the metaphysics. The thinking, the philosophy you need to do. When I say you need to do, I'm not talking about you specific, but in all generality about metaphysics.
Right. So why would I want to differentiate between purely subjective states and purely or more objective states?
So he strawmans or it creates a red herring or something like that. I'm talking about the inside-outside dichotomy, right? And then he's talking about objective or subjective. That's not necessarily what we are dealing with. Or he's trying to force his terms onto me, right? So it's like he's not trying to make sure that we are in agreement or that we are using the same terms on, just like when he talked to rationality rules and he spent the first, hour of the discussion trying to get to the right terms or understanding of terms. This time, there's no need to do that apparently, right? And it basically because he has no idea that somebody else might actually have dug deeper into good philosophy than he has. To him, listeners are just tools he uses in order to get to, throw words around. He thinks he's superior. He's working from the understanding he must be superior. So whenever there's somebody else discussing something with him about philosophical aspects, he feels he's superior because everybody else seems to be inferior, and his sort of the underlying psychology of him always tries to seemingly try to destroy the other part's urge or ability and so forth to actually get to a good discussion, right? So it's derailed from the beginning, right? It's a dysfunctional discussion or discourse from the beginning. He has derailed it, deliberately, maybe unconsciously, but seems like it's consciously, right? To control the debate, basically, right? And making sure that nobody's challenging him. And that thing about not wanting to be challenged, I think, as he points out, I don't want to go crazy. That's not a philosophical. It's not an argument. It's fucking stupid, right? It's stupid to say I don't. Why do you need to philosophize about this Otherwise, it would go crazy. I think I pointed it out in the last part. This is part 3, I think, right? And I was like, what? But I remember he talked about this going crazy thing before. But it's like, it's not an argument. I'm trying to get to the thinking that when he says, okay, the first step, the ground floor is your experience. And then I'm saying, okay, fine, great, we're on the same page. Okay, the next step is what? Is that objective and subjective? Okay, what is it about that experience that convinces you that, what is there some kind of reasoning that I have, if I could, maybe my expression wasn't that perfect. So I think it's also sort of misunderstood. I didn't really get the point I was trying to get to, right? But it's a series of connected statements that ultimately gets you through all of philosophy. In order to get to whatever you need to get to, right? I would say you need to start from the ground floor, go all the way to a moral principle. But there could be other avenues, right? But I'm just trying to get at what is it in your philosophy that makes you say, okay, now I have got settled that the starting point is experience. Now I'm going to differentiate between objective and subjective. What is it about the experience? Because that's all you have at this point. You have no other references than your experience because you just settled that that's the starting point. You can't use anything that you have philosophized before or any preconceived ideas of anything. You're starting from a blank slate and then you're saying there are experiences. Okay, the next step in your philosophy must be based somehow on those experiences, right? And if you draw any conclusion or make any division, there must be something about those experiences that necessitates that direction you're going in, right? Otherwise, I mean, and that might also be something I have to work with in my philosophy, that it's like, it's slightly along the lines of confirmation bias, right? That you are, so, okay, I have to go in that direction. And then I'm sort of taking, bird's eye view direction towards the goal, a moral principle, or, that, and you might take the shortest route that isn't actually the correct route, right? But what I'm saying is very likely that you're going to need an axiom stated, because you can't derive the next step from the previous step. And it might actually be, I was thinking about this last night, that all of metaphysics is basically one long string of axioms. There are actually no reasoning in metaphysics. I'm still trying to dig this out of my brain, so to say, that there's actually not really that much philosophy except getting to some good axioms that takes you in that direction you need to go, right? The most parsimonious road to epistemology. Not leaving anything out, but in order to get to epistemology, there's something about it that you need to go through, but you can't philosophize, maybe. You can philosophize, but you can't reason your way through it, right? Maybe you can't reason your way through metaphysics. Maybe that's why it's so fucking difficult in some sense, right? And one other point I might mention here, that these kinds of discussions usually provokes my mind into some aspect. There's always something that take away, that sort of triggers something in me that makes me think that there's some aspect of my philosophy that could be slightly improved, right? So nothing is as bad, so that there's nothing to gain from a discussion like this. That it may have a spin-off, let's say, right? That I'm getting to a philosophy that is a spin-off of the main course of the discussion, which didn't work out in any decent understanding of working out, right? But then I got to think of something else, because I was thinking and philosophizing while I was arguing, trying to formulate it, and then I it triggered me that actually you need to make might actually need to make an axiom every time you make a new argument in metaphysics, right? It can only be axiomized. It cannot be reasoned, maybe, right? But I still have to sort of work on this, right? But that sort of way, maybe it's freaking important, right? And I'm writing a book on philosophy, so basically a treatise on philosophy, you could say. And if this is correct, that you need to axiomize all your way through metaphysics, well, that needs to be implemented in my book then, right? Okay, so at least I gained something from this. It might not be, but at least I then cover the base, right? Okay, let's head in.
In other words, why would I want to differentiate between those aspects of the mind I can have direct control over and those aspects of the mind I can have no direct control over? Well, A, because I want to survive, and B, because I don't want to be insane. So somebody who believes that the waking reality is exactly the same.
No, but it's like he is focused on preconceived conclusions about, if you start thinking, you can't sort of carry an idea and then think of it and then say, no, it doesn't work or something, sort of back and forth. So it's like, I don't want to go insane. You can't say that kind of philosophy. It's like, oh, no, you can't go there, right? Don't go down the yellow brick road, right? It's sort of hysterical kind of approach, right? It's like, no, that's illegal philosophy, right? At least that's what it sounds like to me, right? Okay, we can entertain the ideas or the thinking and try to approach the idea and maybe we can wiggle our way through it somehow together, right? But no, I don't want to go crazy. What's wrong with you, right? It's like, relax, mate, right? Okay.
As a dream at night, that person is called psychotic or significant hallucinations or schizophrenic or whatever. So mental illness is a very tortuous and horrible state, and it's unsurvivable. So the only reason that you and I are here to have this debate, which is a fun debate, and I'm enjoying it, and thank you for calling in. So the only reason that we're alive to do this is because our ancestors, all the way back billions of years, were able to successfully differentiate between internal states and objective states. So the internal
states and objective states. Now there's something called objective states. What's that? I mean, he just said, to recap, that everything is an internal experience. It's an experience in the mind, right? And then he just labels it as an objective state. What the hell is that? What color is objective state? What sound is an objective state? What's taste is an objective state? And if there's an objective state, is there also a subjective state? And what is that? Can it switch from one to the other? Or, how does that work? And that's how he argues with people. He's just throwing terms and ideas and concepts, abstractions, whatever it is, at people. And then sort of, now I've proven it, right? No, that's not how you do it, right? You can't, it's like somebody trying to build a car and then just throw the tools at the car or at something and then thinking that it will create a car. It doesn't work that way. Maybe that's also a stupid analogy. But, he's trying to numb you with words, right? He's throwing terms at you and, he's trying to get you unbalanced. And then when people are unbalanced, right, then they'll either get angry or they'll be passive or they'll something will happen that is to his advantage, and then he can sort of do whatever he wants to say. Didn't you listen? Or you're straw manning, or you're something. He'll just throw something at you, right? And this level of philosophy, which it isn't. It is not philosophy. It's not a philosophical discourse or discussion, right? It's anything but, right? And that's why I think he shouldn't call himself a philosopher, because he's giving philosophy a bad name. He's not taking care of the craft of doing philosophy. All these minions that follows him, they have no respect at all for philosophy. I mean, how could they possibly have if they follow this idiot, right? He is a fucking asshole, right? To put it very technically. He's not a custodian of good philosophical discourse traditions or showing a larger than life approach. When he claims himself to be somebody who's going to be remembered, and they are making universities with his name on it, and academies of philosophy, the Stefan Molyneux Academy of Philosophy. No, they won't. They won't. You are not going to be remembered for anything but being an angry idiot who didn't even understand problems in your own philosophy, even when people trying to fly it in your face, right? That's not, I mean, if you do not get this concept, or excuse me, the paradox, as I call it, that I'm trying to point out, you will never, I predict that, because he says I can predict the future, apparently, right? He can know about the future. So I'm telling him, I know that he won't be known for anything that he will be liked to be known for, right? So
state is, well, I'm hungry, I had a nap, and I dreamt I was eating food, right? So then they wake up and they're still hungry, and they don't think, well, I'm fine, I don't need to eat because I just dreamed about it, because then they would die, because they wouldn't have enough food. So the way that they do, so animals in general have to differentiate, all animals, I mean, that have dreams, which is mammals, I think, and above, have to differentiate between the subjective states and the objective states, because survival requires a success.
No, and then there's also a problem when in these kinds of discussions. Fair enough, if that's the terms he wants to use about external and internal, or whatever, label he's putting on these things, right? He called it subjective and objective. I think it's a very bad idea to use these two terms to describe that there's something that is either outside or representation of outside, and there's something that is purely inside, like the feeling of hunger or a dream or whatever, right? Just because it represents something outside. I mean, it's like when he uses this, objectivity and subjectivity are used in very commonly in other aspects of thinking than in describing reality or the access to reality or the experience of reality and these things, right? It's like saying there's an outside and an inside, and the outside are called objective and the inside are called subjective. It's like it's the same two things that has then two labels. Adding the label objective to that which he says he can't sort of change doesn't add any new thinking or anything new to that, except that he's conflating other kinds of ideas of objectivity with that external world, right? So that he creates even more complexity and confusion by doing it this way, right? But it's also maybe a kind of trick that, okay, now I have labeled it as objective. That means automatically that it's better than the subjective or something like that, right? So then he's using a label just grabbed out of nowhere, and then he's sort of, okay, and the objectivity means that it's more correct than subjectivity, and that just falls out of the term because that's what the meaning of the term is. But you just brought it in without arguing why you're using the term, other than you're just sticking the label on, and then you are interpreting the meaning of the word after you have just slapped it on your philosophy. So that's also bad philosophy, right? Bad technique and bad use of terms and so on. So you can go on with this guy. It's if you take one of my deconstructions of his books, the one on UPB, for instance, it's like this. It's a big mess. First of all, the problem is he thinks he has found the Holy Grail, right? philosophy. But when you read it, it's like, does he even read what he writes? And who is the editor of this? Or proofreaders of this? Haven't they said there's something wrong here? It doesn't, right? Or has he only used people who doesn't know shit about philosophy, and so he could think that he's so fantastic, right? When they read it, oh my God, I don't understand it, so it must be great because he's Jesus of philosophy, right? Something like that. It's so unbelievably awful. I mean, it's awful, next level awful, right? It's not just bad philosophy. It's like, it's incoherent. There's no definitions of anything. He basically says that he doesn't have to prove that murder is wrong, or so, and that's he's basically saying he doesn't have to prove anything he's doing in this book about ethics. So there's so much wrong with this book. It's unbelievable, right? So he is basically an imposter, right?
Successful negotiation with the objective state. So you may say that you're a radical subjectivist or whatever it is, but it's not true.
I didn't say that. So now he is misrepresenting what I said, right? But he told me I couldn't do that. I had to be precise about what he said, right? No, I said, that's what you would call a radical skeptic, right? Or something along those lines. That's what you would call radical skepticism. No. So then he says, but then you are as a radical skeptic. No, I never said that. I never said that. But that's what he does. I'm using that fits because radical skeptics, those are the crazy people. And I can use that label on him because he's crazy. Right?
Not in how you live, not in the practical manner of how you live. So, for instance,
I might also add this, that he is way down the road in philosophy, right? These things he is talking about now is something you might want to discuss when you get down to sort of close to epistemology, right? I'm way back at the reduction base, or the beginning, and trying to establish step by step a coherent philosophy that might eventually get to these points that he's at now. So this kind of disconnected cherry picking topics in philosophy and thinking that you're doing something, he's not. He's trying to find tools to point out that I'm a crazy idiot that wants to destroy his sense of normality or something like that, because that's what he thinks I'm out to do. It wouldn't in a million years occur to him that I might actually be able to argue for something. And when I'm saying that, there might be a paradox in his philosophy. Again, it's like, nobody can tell me there's something wrong with my philosophy, so he's going to destroy me rather than trying to figure out there might be something in what. At least I can say now, I tried my best to enlighten him, right? I tried the best I could to enlighten him. He wouldn't listen. Okay, so have it your way, right? Have it your way.
For many decades, you have got enough sleep. You have got enough food, you have got enough water, you have gone to the dentist, you have sought medical care where necessary, you have not walked off cliffs, you have fully accepted, in order to survive, the difference between internal and external realities, between subjective and objective process.
Yes, but that's not the part we're dealing with now. We are starting from the ground floor, and we need to, if you need to get to that point where we need to differentiate between the inside and the outside, there's a lot of things we need to settle first. What do we mean by this and what do we mean by that? So it will never be, I mean, okay, I understand you can't do a full treatise on metaphysics in a call-in show like this. Of course not. I mean, maybe you could try, but it would have to be very stringent and moderated and a third-party moderator and so on, right? But that's what needs to be done somehow. And if we are dealing with metaphysics, and I'm saying there's a foundational problem in this metaphysics, Now, he should listen up, right? He shouldn't be talking all the time. He shouldn't be shouting. He shouldn't be doing. He should be fucking silent and listening, right? If somebody calls me and say, I want to get on your show, I've found a huge error in your philosophy, I would be like, please come on and tell me what the error is. And I would be like silent the most of the time, reflecting on what he's saying, trying to, even if maybe if there's something I don't understand, I might, have a pause and say, hang on a sec, that which you said there, was that, did you mean this or did you mean that? The term you used, I'm somewhat unsure what you mean or something. Otherwise, you would let the guy or girl talk for until they have presented the minutest detail of this problem that they have found in my philosophy, right? That's what any decent fucking well-functioning philosopher would do and should do, right? Otherwise, it has nothing to do with philosophy, right? It's all about, I'm the greatest, I'm toughest, I have biggest dick, right? It's something like that. And it's sort of megalomaniac kind of a narcissistic, I'm great, nobody can challenge me, this is my bread and butter, I have to live by my business model that I have to be right because I'm written it in a book, right? So, yeah.
So, because if you weren't able to differentiate between that which is subjective and that which is objective.
I never said I weren't able to do that. I never said that. I try to explain certain aspect of my philosophy that coincides with these things he's talking about, but he's still way down the road. I'm trying to pull him back to the starting point, and he thinks, he thinks I'm trying to pull him away from his perfect arguments or something like that. It is dysfunctional on the next level, this, right?
You couldn't possibly have survived. So for me, when you come to me and you say, wow, yes, but metaphysics is so complicated and it's so confusing. And
I didn't say that. I didn't say that it's complicated or confusing. He's framing me. He's strawmanning and red herring and all the fallacies in the book, right? That he claims that other people is doing to him, right? Which they're possibly not. But he's just, he's the master of philosophy. So when he says you are strawmanning, you must be strawmanning, right?
And so on. And we can't know anything for sure. If that's your perspective, hang on, I'm almost done. Well, then there would be no explanation as to how you could possibly have survived. And the only way you survived is to have a very clear distinction between these two things and to understand why you have that clear distinction and why all our ancestors had that clear distinction is a very interesting.
He doesn't know what our ancestors had. He can't experience other people's minds. He might be the only mind in the universe, right? He's just talking to his experiences. He doesn't like that, entertain the idea because he thinks that people are out to get him or something like that. But he can't prove that just because he has an experience that looks like another person and there's the same sounds and the colors and eyes and ears and whatever, that's something outside himself. That's the whole point I'm trying to get to, right? And the paradox points out exactly that you do not have access to that, right? So it's like, yes, you have to work from axioms, but I never really got to explain it because he's just overruling you and, plowing over you, right? Just tramping you down and saying, don't say things like that because it makes me crazy. I'm going to dominate this discussion so I can get rid of you, right? What a crazy boy.
In question, but just throwing up your hands and say, I'm just a brain in a tank and it's all.
I didn't say that. Okay, maybe it's a sort of a rhetorical way of putting it, right? But I didn't say that either.
A simulation. Well, that's not how you actually live, so I don't really.
You can't tell me how I live, but I say he is extending his ideas. He's working from axioms, basically, when he frames it or argues this way, right? But he doesn't identify the axioms by saying, okay, but by saying this, I am implicitly working from an axiom, and the axiom is this, right? The axiom is I'm working from the axiom that when I experience that object or concept, like human being, and makes sounds and noises and has these colors and smells and whatever, that's a similar kind of being as I consider myself, which is also maybe an axiom, right? And that I can communicate with them using a language, maybe a third axiom, right? So he should state these, and if I agree with the axioms, fine. Then we are on the same page, right? But he can't think that far, and maybe it's even worse because he's sort of this free market guy. You know, you have to negotiate, and things like that. I don't find any attempt at negotiating here, right? It's like, this is how it is, and shut the fuck up, right? You're crazy.
Take you very seriously.
I didn't say that. I say that the kind of metaphysical starter I'm pointing out now, or started by pointing out, is what you would refer to as radical skepticism. I don't call myself a radical skeptic. I don't call myself anything.
Okay, I remember I actually said that. I've forgotten I said that.
I'm not into isms at all. I'm into good philosophy. And wherever the thinking leads me, that's where I'm going in philosophy, right? So if I may get back to the point I was trying to start, because it's like you're jumping way ahead very fast, and taking sort of kinds of thinking for granted without clarifying it. If you need to take it step by step, you're talking about objective and subjective without clarifying what they are. And that's
a complete mischaracterization. I have absolutely and repeatedly defined. Now, maybe you're not into listening, maybe it's too much sense data.
Oh, that's what I pointed out before. I'm pointing out if you say that something is outside and there's something inside, that's a part of my question. And then you can't just twist my question around and say, now I'm calling it objective and subjective, right? So now you're sort of taking control. Yeah. You had some formulation there. No. We are using my words, right? And I'm explained my words. And if you try to get back to inside, outside, you are misrepresenting me. But it was my fucking question. So it's like, hysterical, right? It's like, I even lack words to describe how weird it is, right? I mean, it's abusive, right? Abusive might be the best word, right? He's abusive towards people who doesn't, when there's a certain line, when they cross that line, he gets abusive towards them, right? Because I think, I mean, if I'm sort of psychologizing on it, when rewind, there are certain aspects of his philosophy he hasn't thought through, right? He has sort of a few cherry-picked topics where he has some insights, he thinks, and maybe there's a few good insights. I wouldn't rule that out, right? And I would support those, right? And the rest of philosophy, he just fills in as he goes along, right? That's why you can find 117 different definitions of truth, for instance, because he haven't thought it through. He haven't made these connected statements or connected arguments that leads from A to B to C to D and then finally to a moral principle or something like that, a definition of knowledge, whatever, right? So he has these sort of checkpoints in various places in philosophy that he has pounded himself into being good at arguing for, more or less sophistically, right? And then the rest of it, he's sort of, I'm going to wing that whenever I'm in a discussion. But these things that he hasn't thought through, right? That doesn't fit in the general picture of the philosophy. He gets mad because he knows that he is on thin ice, I believe, right? And if somebody comes along who can actually argue and actually get under his skin in these areas, he's going to fight like a fucking tiger being cornered, right? And that's stupid. That's not a good philosopher. That is somebody who has some completely skewed ideas about their own greatness.
for you, maybe you're overwhelmed, but I have repeatedly and clearly differentiated between the subjective and the objective. Again, if you weren't listening, that's not my fault.
No,
I have repeatedly said that the subjective...
I was listening, but that doesn't mean I can remember everything he said. I don't have a photographic memory, right? Or what would it be, a sound recording memory, right? I mean, he's rambling on for 5 minutes. He can't expect me to remember everything he says. Also because it's not about what I'm talking about. He might think that it is. But if I say, I would like to go back to that because that makes sense to me, and then I said, fuck you, I'm going to talk about my dreams or whatever it is he's talking about, right?
Hang on, I've repeated no because you weren't listening. Because you weren't listening, I will repeat it.
So now he's claiming he knows that I weren't listening, right? It's how disgusting, right? So it's sort of framing me, labeling me. He's just working as a sophist, putting new labels. You're stupid, you're bad, you're doing it wrong. It's constantly pounding on it, right? In order to create among his cult acolytes there, right? So they have a mix of the cognitive dissonance. No, it's not exactly that, but they are narcissistic supply, right? They are empathetic people who need a dominating figure that can tell them what to do, right? And they gravitate towards somebody like Stefan Molyneux, and they're going to support whatever he says. He's always right. And these callers, they're just stupid, right? Yeah, they're crazy. I mean, and he has to keep that going because that's his business model, right? That gives him some kind of sense that there's somebody out there actually listening to him, right?
The subjective is the inconsistent and contradictory information that exists within my mind, such as dreams, or things which I can directly control, such as my thoughts or sensations within my body to some degree. The objective is areas where my mind cannot influence.
You call it areas. Why is he not referencing experiences? Because he stated that was the ground floor. So now he's using other terms. So then I have to connect. Then when he talks about that means color or sound or whatever, right? So maybe he's mixing in concepts and abstractions, and everything is one big pile now. There's no coherence to it, right? And if he can confuse people sufficiently about these things, then he can get away with anything, basically, right? And they're going to say, wow, he must be very smart, right? I don't understand anything about this. He must be smart.
Directly any of the sense data. I can't snap my fingers and have it change from day to night. I can't age backwards. I can't, So I very clearly said these two things. And so again, if you're not listening or you're not making notes or you can't process that quickly.
So he's not trying to paint me as an idiot, right? Who's out to destroy he's the one destroying the discourse, right? But he's sort of, trying to label me as the stupid guy or the destructive guy, right? I'm just trying to get to a decent kind of discourse where we get to the next thing that we might agree on, settle that, get to the next thing, and so on and so on and so on. And that's how you get to those points. If you agree and then find a disagreement, well, where did we go wrong? We can't just cherry pick subjects because it's not connected to anything where we can get back to a sound or an agreement page, right? So do we agree about yes? Okay. Do we agree about this? Yes. Do we agree about this? No. Okay. Let's figure out why we disagree. If we can't figure that out, okay, we could stop the discussion there. But at least we know that the previous step was where we agreed, right? So far, so good. Now nobody knows what the hell. I'm not more enlightened about his metaphysics, and he probably is thinking, he's probably more solidified in his weird materialist thinking than he was before I tried to point the problems out, right? So it's just a big pile of nothing.
I can't help that. But if you keep saying I haven't defined these things when I have to correct you.
So are we talking metaphysics now, right? He's trying to move the discussion into how I do things, how I frame things, how I, formulate myself, or I can't remember what he says, or, I'm misrepresenting him, or it's all about how I do things, not the philosophy, right?
It's like if you are starting from if you're having a starting point that's saying I'm having some experiences, and I say that they're in my mind, or that's with the starting point, right? Then the next leap is, okay, as I hear you saying, right, that I have to differentiate between object and subject. So,
I mean, the objective and subjective is the terms that I use as a shorthand for things which I can control in my mind and things which I cannot.
Before you break in, you agreed, or you asked me to agree to, breaking the stream of conscious, right?
Okay, as I said, he used those labels. Okay, fine. I used my argument for the problem in his philosophy, calling it a paradox, right? But that's what he says. Just saying paradox is not enough. That's not an argument. Or he puts these labels on, so those labels are not an argument, according to his own standards, right? So it's like he can find all sorts of problems in what other people sees, but he can't see that he's doing the exact same thing himself, right? And that's also, I remember thinking that now he's using labels, and he blamed me for using a label, calling it not an argument. So he uses something that is not an argument. What the hell is he doing? He's just gaslighting me? He's just fooling around with me? It's like the mouse, the cat playing with the mouse or something. What the hell is going on, right?
So it's just it's like it feels that when you present it, that's my interpretation or my feeling when you say that it's a beaten path. I need to go there, and I need to go there. I need to state that and that and that and that. But in my opinion, when you do the metaphysics, if you start with one point, that point you should use that point in order to argue why you're doing the next thing. So what is it about your experience that makes you, or could make you say, now I have to differentiate between objective and subjective? What is it about the experiences? Because
if you're asking me that question,
Yeah, but why is he breaking in? I can ask a question. That doesn't mean that whenever I have done, I sort of elaborate on that question after I have made the question. But because I made a question, now you think he's supposed to break in and say, now I need to answer that question you made. You can't say any further because you made a question. There was no rule that if you create a question and when you're done presented the question, he can break in and answer the question. There might be something further I need to say before I let him answer the question. So it's like, it's dysfunctional on the next level, this, right? It's like, oh my God. But what has he been doing the last 15 years? He's been sitting in his fucking chair at home, talking to a microphone, right? And he's been out doing some documentaries, movies, let's say, right? And some speeches. But he's not in contact with anybody who can actually challenge and improve. He can play ball against, right? He's not listening to philosophy podcasts. I would be very surprised if he had listened to other kinds of philosophy podcasts the last 15 years, because he's convinced that he knows everything, right? What has he done to improve his philosophy? Nothing. He's just solidified his own mediocre insights, right? So it's you have to hone your skills. You have to keep pounding yourself against other people's thinking, in my opinion. And that I don't say you have to do it, But to me, that's what works. When I listen to somebody else and say, I can make sense of that, right? Or that's something that I think this week in my own philosophy, I might listen to this and maybe get an idea or two that actually fits with my philosophy. Maybe I have to overturn something. And I keep listening to other philosophy podcasts. I have my favorites, but I try to find new people all the time that might have an avenue into something else, right? That sort of challenges. You can't, as a philosopher, you can't think of everything, right? There has to be weak areas in your philosophy somewhere. And that's always the problem. You have to be a jack of all trades in philosophy. You can't just focus on metaphysics, right? In my opinion, because you are disconnected from the rest of the thinking. And in the end, as Molyneux says, you have to go to work, or you have to find food, or you have to find a mate, or find a place to sleep, and whatever, right? In the end, that's what keeps you alive in order to be able to think, right? But if you spend all your days thinking about metaphysics, you're not going to actually create something that is coherent and useful, because in the end, the closer you get to a moral principle, that's where you are closing in on reality or your everyday whereabouts, right? And how you behave yourself. So,
asking me that question, the answer is that there's a very clear differentiation between the things that I can directly control within my own mind and the things which I cannot directly control within my own mind. That's a very clear, and it's, I'm 55 and a half years old, so I guess 55.5 years old. And throughout my entire experience of living and through the entire experience of everyone else who's alive, we have to have a very clear a very clear distinction between the subjective and the objective. And by subjective, I mean things that I can control, things which can be contradictory within my...
All these things he's talking about, this is a gut reaction level functioning of human beings, right? Nobody has any trouble identifying food, right? Nobody has any trouble using their legs, right? It's almost like you don't even have to think about it in order to do it, right? There's a lot of people who haven't done any philosophy whatsoever, and they're still able to find food, and so on and so on and so on, right? And there's all this kindergarten argumentation that he thinks I'm next to stupid. That he can't even hear that I have spent the last 10 years at least honing my skills in both understanding philosophy and arguing philosophy, right? He can't hear that. He can only hear his own thinking and his own, and if people don't conform with his system, there's something wrong with them, and they're out to get me, right? So it's really annoying to talk with a person like that, right? It's very, very annoying, right? And, I didn't expect basically anything better than this, right? I mean, I might have some naive hope that I might actually at least get him to say, okay, there was something about this dude, even if he was a weird guy, right? There was something about it that triggered something in me. Maybe I should next weekend sit myself down with a glass of water and think this over. There might be something, right? Let me give it a shot, right? If I could do that, fine. So I want him to be remembered in 500 years for something good, right? But no, I don't think so.
Own mind versus the things that I cannot control and which are perfectly consistent outside my mind. And that's how I differentiate between the two. If you can't get your resources from objective reality, you can't survive. So you yourself have also had no problem differentiating between the subjective and the objective.
I've never said I have problems. He's putting words into my mouth that I haven't even said. It's not even a bad representation of what I'm saying. He's saying I said things I didn't say. I have not talked about this. I'm trying to clarify what he means by inside and outside, right? I'm asking the questions, right? I'm not saying much here, right? I have never got around to it. He doesn't leave any room for me to present a well-rounded philosophy of any kind, and then he just throws things at me as if I am a sort of a certain category of people who all thinks the same way, and they think this, and therefore you're one of those, and I'm attacking you indirectly from my biases or you know, prejudice about what you're thinking, right? So it's like you're one of those, and they are all like this, and therefore you're thinking like this. And that's why I very early on say I'm not into isms, I'm into good philosophy, right? But apparently he didn't hear that.
Because we need resources from the objective universe in order to survive and continue our semi-subjective state of mind. So the reason why I have that experience is there are things which I can control in my mind and things which I cannot control no matter how much willpower. I mean, I remember when I was a kid in the 70s.
Okay, why do I need to hear about your memories of when you were a kid, right? It's like, now it would be nice if we would stop his, his speech and and it's all, at this point, it's the discourse is destroyed. It's not on a coherent level that I can any longer participate in, right? It's like, what would I try to get back to that which was the foundation so we could work step by step, but I'm not going to step into this middle of the road halfway into epistemology thinking, because that was not my question, right? So what do? Do I keep saying, let's go back, go back? And he's going to jump ahead again, right? And say, no, I am talking about objective and subjective. So, when I try to say, okay, if we say that we're starting from the starting point, and you think that the next step is subjective and objective, what is it about that experience that makes you think that must be the next step? Excuse me. So it's impossible to get anywhere, right? It's impossible to get anywhere. Even if I'm sort of, okay, I understand what he's saying, but he's just basically just saying there's an inside and an outside, and the outside I know about because there's something I call objective that can't be changed, but the other thing, the rest of it, I can change or influence or something like that, right? I'm not sure what actually he means by that. But then he's just sort of, okay, I made the dichotomy, the inside and outside are delineated in the experiences by that which is unchangeable and that is which is changeable or influenceable. Okay, I can see a point in making that differentiation between those experiences, but it doesn't help me get to the point where you say that part that is objective, is that either still in your mind or is it outside your mind, right? And then I think he starts to say it's inside my mind, and I was thinking that I thought you meant it as being outside. And then if it's both inside, aren't they both subjective then? Because if they're inside, how can I? Wouldn't objective mean something that we both can agree on? So what does the objective mean if we can't agree upon it, right? So it's like, where are we going with this, right? So, yeah. And you think is the clincher argument for he's proven that there's something outside by him classifying that experience as being outside, right? The way he should do it is saying, that's an axiom I'm working from, right? That's an outside. And then I would have to say to him, okay, but that which you refer to isn't the actual outside. It's a representation of the outside inside your mind, right? At most. And if we could agree upon that, then we will agree upon the flaw in his metaphysics, right? That it's all subjective from the starting point, right? It's all subjective because it's inside his mind, right? And when he says, no, it's objective, it's out. Is it then outside your mind, as he said in the beginning, that there's something that is independent of your mind, or something that must be outside, right? But then does he mean that it's independent because you can't change it, or what? So that's also a bit confusing to me, right? And but at the end of the day, the paradox I'm trying to point out to him, I don't think he gets it. I don't think he gets it. I don't think if he got it right, he would make a break for a couple of weeks and being dumbfounded that he hadn't seen that before in this 40 years of philosophy, right? And thinking to myself, how could I be so stupid? I hadn't seen that, right? But apparently it keeps, there has been a couple of whatever videos since then. Nothing seems that he has found anything new in that discussion. It's like, done and dusted. Let's get on with the next caller, right?
There was all this woo-woo mysticism going around, and there was all this, you can control objects with your mind, and actually got into the newspaper for spoon bending and stuff like that. And I experimented, I think, like most curious kids do. I wonder if I'm going to concentrate on trying to lift this cup with my mind. And I tried it, and my friends tried it, and it was all over the place, this sort of cultural thing, and it never worked. It never happened. Whereas, of course, in dreams, if you're into lucid dreaming, you can, to some degree, control the contents and purposes of your dreams. And there are times when I'm having a nightmare when I can force myself to wake up. But if something scary is happening in my real life, I can never force myself to wake up. So the difference between these two, which is perfectly consistent and perfectly universal as far as anybody has been able to verify with me, for me it's very important to distinguish between these two states of mind, because they definitely exist within my mind and within the minds of just about everyone I know.
Yes, but I agree so far that that's also the steps I would take in my philosophy. The difference is that which I call the outside is also still an experience inside. I only have access to the experience inside my mind. I'm classifying a part of it. This is the part I can control, which I classify as that which is outside. What I have access is not the actual outside. It's still an experience inside, because I need to open those eyes in order for it to get in, right? Or how would I put it without stretching my philosophy here? That's the reason why I think a guy like Immanuel Kant says the actual world, that which it tries to tell you about, so to say, you don't have access to, because you need the experience inside. And when it has become an experience, it is no longer the thing outside. If I'm experiencing elephant, the elephant is not, decomposing itself, transmitting itself through some kind of photons, traveling through my eyes, and then decomposing itself into an elephant and saying, this is the actual same thing that is out there, right? So it can't both be the thing out there and the thing in there, if I'm classifying my experience that way. So what I'm saying is, what I call the outside is still inside. But because it's that which you call the objective universe, because you can't change it, you can't decide whether or not to have the actual impression of an elephant. If you have an impression of an elephant, you have an impression of an elephant. If you don't have that impression, you can't force that impression on you. You can maybe, have that shadowy experience of the concept that you use in order to identify the elephant. But that's a concept you're dragging out of your mind somewhere, right? I would say that the mind actually uses in order to identify some pattern in your experience. So, not to get too deep, but it can't both be the thing outside and the thing inside. And if you had the access to the real thing outside, why the hell would you need the inside if the inside can be erroneous, right? So that's the paradox that is built in that kind of sort of, I would call materialist thinking. And another thing that the materialist paradox runs into is what is known as the hard problem of consciousness, which is how how that's a scientific description of the world in numbers and so on. How does that become sort of the color of roses? There's nothing in numbers or physics or Newton or your Avogadro's number or anything, logarithm or the particles and subatomic whatever. Nothing necessitates the experience of red, right? And that's the paradox that you arrive at, or the problem you arrive at in a materialist thinking. The other way around, you eliminate that problem.
I'm sorry, how do you eliminate the problem?
Because if you stay from the inside and say, okay, I can only, because we agreed that's the starting point, right? But you can't get beyond the inside. You can't step out of yourself and say, there's an elephant out there, and I'm stepping back in and saying, I'm having the same elephant inside. How could that be possible at all? And when you say that you're working from the outside, then how the hell does that become the inside? But the inside is the qualia, right? So that's the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay, so I understand. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Sorry, if you were just finishing up. I thought you were repeating, but go ahead.
So the hard problem is that you can't get to your qualia or your experiences from the outside. And then the argument is, or the philosophy should be, well, how do I have access to that outside then? Well, I would say you haven't. You haven't. If you say your experience is some outside, then it's just a classification of your experiences, and that's fine. I work from that. When I drive my car, I am working from my experiencing being a representation of that outside. But in order for me to have the experience, that experience must be inside my brain, right? Or inside my mind. Mm-hmm. So the difference is that the actual outside, you do not have access to. No matter how you fiddle around with your experiences, you can actually never get to the real thing, as Immanuel Kant would say, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the paradox.
Yeah. It's like he has been completely muted. I don't remember exactly this. Maybe I was trying very hard to make sure that I found some good. I actually think I got quite well around this, but I sort of forgot that he asked how does idealism, which would be opposite to materialism, actually point out that you can't get to the answer of the hard problem of consciousness. I think I forgot that he asked that question. I'm sort of kicking myself now, mentally in the ass for not answering the question, because I think he just thinks that I'm trying to get around it and not answering it. But the short and quick answer is that you can't get to it. And that was what I tried to, and then I forgot the answer, or the question may be right. But you can't get to the answer. You can make the question, but you can never get out and experience that which becomes the experience, right? So you can never get to whatever is going on there, right? You can never get to it, because you have to have an experience of it, and then you're on the experience side of things, right? So you can't force yourself outside your experience, because you need to be in the experience to have anything, right? And when you're in the experience, you're not on the other side, right? So it's like you can't get to the answer. And that's enough to say, well, I don't give a crap about the question then, right? And the same thing with the problem of the minds, which is even more obvious, that if you can't get to outside your experience, then whatever is beyond, whatever the representation you are axiomatically deciding to work from, those real things you do not have access to, and that's where their minds are, right? So obviously you can't get to other people's minds.
Is if you say it's an outside, how do you experience that actual outside if it's outside your mind? Because an experience of that outside needs to be inside, and when it's inside, it's no longer the outside.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you done.
Mm-hmm. I might actually have stirred something in him. He sounds a little baffled, doesn't he? He sounds a bit like, this is some kind of hardcore philosophy I've never heard before. I never heard it. I never quite got it that way, right? Maybe I have stirred something in him, right? Okay, let's head on. I think he's shaking it off and getting back on the horse and grabbing his, lances and fighting the evil of idealism, right?
That part?
Done? I don't. What do you mean?
No. I don't want to interrupt you, but I felt you were just sort of repeating at that point. Okay, so let's just do a bit of back and forth here, and if you could keep your answer short, I'd appreciate it.
It's excuse me for breaking in, but it's sort of a difficult. English is not my first language, and I'm trying my best to illuminate both myself and you on my thinking.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I get it. Now, see,
Okay, it's like, yeah. You don't need to explain. I know everything about it. Let me talk now, right?
I fully accept that my experience of you is entirely within my brain. Right? We can't see each other, but my experience of you coming through my ears is entirely within my brain. So I accept that. To have a standard of...
Okay, so why don't you stick to it then? So I don't get his understanding of this inside-outside dichotomy, right? It's like he's saying that he doesn't say all, but when he's talking about experiences, right? Those are the qualia, those are the senses or sense states or whatever he calls it. Then that's what he has to work with, right? And if he needs to experience them, they must be in his mind. And mind itself is also an abstraction from those experiences, right? There's not a sixth mind sense where an experience of mind arrives. So it must be an abstraction from what you have, those five senses, right? So mind is something that is added to the experience. That's an abstraction you are putting into your philosophy in the next step, right? So he needs to clarify that. But it's like he has all these ideas, and it's like they're there, so they must be there, so I can explain everything from that which is there, right? But that's not good philosophy, in my opinion. You need to get down to the basics in this one-way street of the experience that eventually becomes some kind of action based on your emotions, based on your experience, cognitions that are based on your experiences that's come from an outside you do not have access to, right?
Knowledge that requires human beings be a god is not a valid standard of knowledge for me. In other words, saying that the only way things could be true is if you could directly, not through any medium of the senses, directly experience every atom in the universe, or if you're looking at an apple, I can only see the outside and one side and so on, and saying, well, you can't really know the apple unless you know every atom within the apple. Well, that's having an impossible standard of knowledge that doesn't exist to any living or sentient creature. So I don't accept that as a standard of knowledge, to say that the only way that we could know anything is for our brain to leap out of our skull and merge with the object and directly, I don't even know what that would mean, directly experience it. Because
No, I agree that's he is actually closing in on my thinking to some extent, right? He is saying that you can't get to the thing itself. Your mind can't sort of wiggle around and, encompass this thing. What would that actually be? That's actually good thinking. But he should run with it, right? He should say, okay, but that means that I can't get to the real thing, right? So is he accepting that he has experience in his mind that can only possibly be at most a representation of that which is outside? Well, then he is sort of accepting that my approach to metaphysics is correct. So what is he up in arms about, right? But he can't be. There must be something that he doesn't get, right? Otherwise you would say, oh my God, you're right. Wouldn't he? I mean, wouldn't he? I don't know. It's a little difficult to follow him there, right?
The only way that we can experience things is through...
experience things. Now we talk about things. A color, a sound, and so on. They're not things. We're starting from that reduction base, right? He's just jumping into all sorts of things and grabbing and then saying that there are things and that this and that this and the other. Yes, I know it's a philosophy show. It's not rigid philosophical dissertation we're doing, but it has to be closer to that in order for us to get to something that we can agree upon, right? Or disagree, for that matter, right?
Like the outside world is through sense data. So I don't accept the Kantian requirement that we know the things of themselves or in themselves. I fully accept.
No. That's completely different. That's opposite what he's saying. Kant is saying exactly that you can't get to it. That's what I pointed out several times now, right? And now you're saying that you can't get. Is that a priori knowledge you're going for? No, but a priori knowledge is a consequence of not having access to the thing itself. That's why he thinks he has to have some other avenue to knowledge, right? If you're locked off from that thing outside and you only have the inside, then you are locked inside and purely subjective experience that you can't say that other people are experiencing that because you are locked inside that experience, right? That's why it's a very big thing. It's a huge thing to go that route, but the philosophy leads there. So you have to go there, even if you don't like it. And I didn't like it either when I figured this out, right? But then Immanuel Kant would go back and say, okay, so how do I have access to any kind of knowledge then? There must be some other avenue. I must have some kind of a priori knowledge that, I have carried on from somewhere else, or transcendental whatever experiences, right? And then it goes into this kind of, and I have no patience with that, right? That's not necessary, right? In my opinion. But I'm not going to illuminate you on my particular understandings of epistemology in this podcast here, right? But I think I've figured it out, right? I'm still working deeply on these aspects, right? It gets very quick. Epistemology there are so many, risk points where you can go wrong, right? There are so many ways to go wrong in epistemology, right? It's unbelievable. Epistemology is, in my opinion, way more complicated than metaphysics. It's really difficult to handle, right? It's not impossible, but you really have to keep it straight, right? You need to be very strict. And if you haven't settled your metaphysics, your epistemology is never going to fly. It's going to be contradictory. It's going to be hand-waving. It's going to be, I think this is knowledge and something like that, right? Your metaphysics has to be razor sharp, right? Razor sharp. And then you have to keep your focus absolutely straight when you're doing epistemology. And then you might get through, right? Okay.
That the highest standard of knowledge that we can possibly attain is conceptual consistency through the evidence of the senses. That's to me, there's nothing greater or higher or a standard that shrinks that down to nothing. Because it is inconceivable that we are not gods, and we can only experience the outside through the evidence of the senses, and our brain still sits within our skull. And
No. But you don't have outside. You don't have access to any control mechanism that can say this is the outside. That's the point I'm trying to get to. He thinks because he is labeled from the inside, he is doing the philosophy saying this is objective over here, this experience is objective, and that's from the outside. No, you can't say that from just observing, right? There's nothing about the experience that necessitated to be outside, in my opinion, right? I might be wrong about this. If you have an idea of how to do that, I would be open for suggestions, please. But there's nothing about the experience other than you are so accustomed to consider it an outside that you have convinced yourself that it is an outside. That makes you say it must be an outside. But when you think about it, there is nothing about it that tells you it's an outside, right? It might just as well be an inside that very much looks like an outside, and you're treating it as an outside, right? And that's, you're going along with the cogito with Descartes, right? This radical skepticism, what a Cartesian doubt, I think it's called, right? Doesn't matter. But this is the springing point, and I have to conclude now, he doesn't understand what I'm saying. He thinks that because he labeled it as objective, then it must be something outside. That doesn't follow. And if he only ever had the experience inside, right? He actually can't talk about an outside just like that, as if he has any idea what it might be, right? He can't do that. It doesn't follow from that inside. All that is inside is some inside thing, right? And if it's an inside thing, that outside thing is something different, right? Otherwise, it would be the same. And then why would you need both an inside and outside if they are exactly the same? So they must be different, right? And if they're different and you only have the inside, you have no clue what the outside is, right? It follows from sort of reasoning, kind of logic maybe, right? Foundational logic. And then you have no access to it. Your inside is not the same as it. You can only say, in my opinion, okay, I'm going to treat it as if it's a representation of the outside. And that's what I'm doing when I'm going to my fridge and driving my car. I am sort of pretending and taking for granted or taking the chance that is a representation of the outside. I'm doing certain things that is in concordance with my ideas, what I need to do in order to avoid dying or surviving and sort of these things, right? But they're still, all of them are inside experiences. There can't be anything else. And also, one of the things that needs to be pointed out when you do this metaphysics is the inside-outside dichotomy doesn't arrive before you have the experience. You have to derive the inside-outside from the experience, because that's the starting point. But it doesn't follow from the experience, right? So you have to decide that you're working from that, and you can only decide it by what I will call an axiom. But he doesn't seem to understand this, right? It might also be sort of complicated, right?
I fully accept all of that. So I reject the Kantian requirement that we know things of themselves or in themselves that we can get out through our brain and somehow merge.
No, I'm pretty convinced that that wasn't what Kant was saying. As I repeated from the last one, he says you can't get to the thing itself. He's using another avenue, which is a priori knowledge and transcendental whatever, right? In order to get to knowledge, I believe, right? He's actually saying the opposite of what Stefan Molyneux is saying. He's confusing a priori and that the thing itself, I think.
With our souls in the universe directly, because that would be requiring, it would be saying, well, we can't know anything unless we're omniscient. We can't live unless we're immortal, right? I mean, I completely reject those standards because they're made-up standards. They don't exist anywhere in the realm of philosophy except as a repudiation of sense data. So let me ask you this. Do you accept at least that there's a difference?
Okay, so now he's going into, this is the same he pulls out every time, right? I should have been better prepared for this, right? He pulls this out where he sort of tries to make you say that you can't trust your senses, or you can't trust this, or you can't trust that, or you shouldn't be skeptical about this, but you're doing this, so you're contradicting to yourself. You're an idiot, I kick you out, right? So that's the trick, right? And to some extent, I can see that if you can find some contradiction somewhere in what I'm saying, I have a problem. I would agree to some extent with that, right? But it's very sophist, his attempt here, right? But if that's the way you find out that there's something wrong with somebody's philosophy, He should take care of the problem I'm trying to point out is his philosophy, right? So, oh my God. Okay, we are approaching 1.5 hours. Maybe we should stop here and say thank you for following so far. And we are at the 42 minutes. I think there's about 20 minutes left until he kicks me out or he mutes the microphone on Telegram, right? And then keeps talking for 20 minutes. I actually think I said 20 hours in the last part. Of course, it's 20 minutes, right? He sort of mutes me without any notification and just say, I'm muting you. And then he'll excuse himself and say, I'm not going to, lambish him in what I'm going to say here or get the last say or anything. But he spent 20 minutes basically telling me I'm an idiot without me having any access to refute or argue or anything like that. What an asshole, right? What an asshole, man. How dare he? How dare he treat people like this who voluntarily come and spend time on his channel trying to discuss hardcore philosophy, which is his baby, right? It's beyond awful, right? Okay, let's see what happened in the next part. And hopefully I can get to maybe 2 parts. I can do the rest of this, right? I can get to the point where he mutes me, and then this last part will be his monologue for 20 minutes before he sort of sorts off, right? Okay, see you in the next one. Oh yeah, by the way, like, share, and subscribe. And please check out the Discord server. There should be a link below. Otherwise, have a nice day. See you next time.